The morning Casimir Voss decided to surrender himself to the North Point survivor settlement, he carried nothing but a weathered leather satchel and 3 years of crushing guilt. His gaunt frame moved through the skeletal remains of what had once been suburban Chicago, each step deliberate despite the tremor in his hands that had developed sometime during the second winter of the outbreak. The infected wandered aimlessly between collapsed houses, their grotesque forms shambling through streets where children had once played hopscotch. Casimir paused at the edge of North Point's perimeter, studying the impressive fortifications that had kept this particular community alive when so many others had fallen. Razor wire gleamed in the pale sunlight, and he could make out the silhouettes of guards stationed at regular intervals along the reinforced walls. These people had built something remarkable in a world gone mad, and he was about to destroy their peace with a truth that could either save them all or tear their fragile society apart. The settlement's leader, Thessaly Chen, had earned a reputation that extended far beyond North Point's borders. Before the outbreak, she had been a trauma nurse at Cook Memorial Hospital, but the apocalypse had forged her into something harder and more decisive. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, and her scrubs had long since been replaced by tactical gear that bore the stains of survival. What hadn't changed were her eyes, still compassionate, still determined to heal whatever could be healed in this broken world. Thessaly stood on the watchtower's platform, scanning the horizon through binoculars as she did every dawn. Movement caught her attention, and she focused on a lone figure approaching from the southwest. Something about his posture struck her as different from the desperate refugees who occasionally found their way to North Point's gates. This man walked with purpose, not desperation, and that made him potentially more dangerous than any mindless infected. "Rail, get up here," she called down to the young man monitoring the radio equipment below. Rail Nakamura had been 17 when the world ended, a computer prodigy whose skills had proven invaluable in maintaining the settlement's communication networks and security systems. His slight frame belied a sharp intellect that had helped North Point avoid countless threats through careful information gathering and technological innovation. Rail bounded up the tower stairs, his fingers already moving across the tablet he carried everywhere. "What we got, Thess?" Single male, approaching from the southwest quadrant. "He's not moving like a typical refugee." Thessaly handed him the binoculars. "Something feels off about this one." Through the lenses, Rail studied the approaching figure. The man's clothes were clean, too clean for someone who had been surviving in the wasteland without support. His movements were controlled, almost military in their precision. Most telling of all, he carried himself like someone with a destination rather than someone seeking salvation. "Should I wake Indira?" Rail asked, lowering the binoculars. Indira Blackwood remained something of an enigma even after 8 months at North Point. She had arrived during a winter storm, half dead from exposure and carrying encrypted files that hinted at government involvement in the outbreak's origins. Her recovery had been slow, and her integration into the community even slower. Thessaly had granted her sanctuary, but Indira's knowledge of pre-outbreak biological weapons programs made everyone nervous. "Not yet," Thessaly decided. "But keep her on standby. If this guy is who I think he might be, we'll need her expertise." As Casimir drew closer to the gates, he could feel multiple sets of eyes tracking his movement. These people had survived 3 years of hell by being cautious, and his arrival would trigger every security protocol they had developed. He understood their wariness. In his position, he would have ordered his own death without hesitation. But understanding didn't make his next actions any easier. The satchel's weight seemed to increase with every step. Inside lay documents that could revolutionize humanity's fight against the infected, along with research notes that would reveal him as the primary architect of their current nightmare. Dr. Casimir Voss had spent 18 months as part of a classified military bioweapons program, and his work on accelerated viral mutation had provided the foundation for what became known as the Lazarus strain, the infection that had turned 70% of the human population into cannibalistic monsters. He stopped 50 yards from the main gate and raised his hands slowly above his head. "My name is Dr. Casimir Voss," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I'm here to surrender myself to your community. I have information about the outbreak's origins and a possible path to a cure. The reaction was immediate. Thessaly felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the name. Every survivor settlement had heard whispers of Dr. Voss, the military scientist whose research had supposedly created the zombie plague. She watched through her binoculars as guards along the perimeter raised their weapons, their training taking over even as shock registered on their faces. "Rael, get Indira. Now." Thessaly's voice was deadly calm. "And wake the council. We're about to make a decision that will determine whether North Point survives another winter." Below, Casimir remained motionless with his hands raised, waiting for judgment from people who had every reason to kill him on sight. The morning wind carried the distant moans of the infected, a constant reminder of the world his research had helped create. Whatever happened next, he was finally ready to face the consequences of his work and perhaps, if they would allow it, find some measure of redemption in the service of those who remained. The council chamber buzzed with barely contained fury as Thessaly called the emergency session to order. Representatives from each of North Point's major families sat around a circular table salvaged from the settlement's former community center, their faces reflecting the same mixture of shock and rage that had gripped the entire community since Casimir's surrender 3 hours earlier. The man himself waited in the medical bay's isolation room, under constant guard and sedated for everyone's safety, including his own. Indira Blackwood sat apart from the others, her pale fingers drumming silently against the table's scarred surface. Since arriving at North Point, she had shared fragments of her knowledge about the pre-outbreak bioweapons programs, but always in vague terms that revealed little about her own involvement. Now, faced with the arrival of someone who might possess answers to questions that had haunted her for 3 years, she found herself caught between hope and terror. "We should execute him immediately," declared Magnus Torvalds, the settlement's chief security officer. His scarred hands gestured emphatically as he spoke, the result of a close encounter with a horde during North Point's second year. "This man is responsible for every death, every loss, every nightmare we've endured. Justice demands his blood." Thessaly understood Magnus' position, it reflected the sentiment of roughly half the settlement's population. But leadership required her to consider angles that pure emotion couldn't encompass. And what if his research notes contain information that could save what's left of humanity? What if killing him means condemning our children to inherit this same hell's cape? "The man's a liar," snapped Elena Vasquez, whose own family had been reduced from 12 members to 3 during the early chaos. "Why would he come here now? Why surrender if he truly has valuable information? It's a trap." Rael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the youngest member of the council by nearly a decade. His technical expertise had earned him a voice in major decisions, but moments like this made him acutely aware of his youth. "I've been monitoring radio chatter from other settlements," he offered quietly. "There are rumors that something big is coming, a coordinated infected migration unlike anything we've seen before. Maybe he knows something about it." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Infected migrations were rare but catastrophic events that could overwhelm even well-defended settlements. If Casimir possessed advanced knowledge of such an event, his information might be worth the moral compromise of keeping him alive. Indira finally spoke, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone present. "I've reviewed the documents he carried. They're authentic. I recognize the formatting and classification codes from my own time in the program." She paused, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. Dr. Voss was indeed instrumental in developing the Lazarus strain, but his research notes also contain theoretical frameworks for potential countermeasures. "Theoretical," Magnus repeated with bitter emphasis. "Theories don't bring back the dead, Indira." "No, but they might prevent future deaths." Thessaly leaned forward, studying the woman who had become one of North Point's most valuable yet enigmatic residents. "What exactly was your role in the bioweapons program, Indira? You've never given us the full truth." The question hung in the air like a blade. Indira had known this moment would come eventually, her knowledge was too specific, too detailed to have been acquired secondhand. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with the resignation of someone accepting an inevitable fate. "I was Dr. Voss's research partner," she admitted. "We developed the Lazarus strain together, along with theoretical countermeasures that were never tested due to the outbreak's premature release." The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might lessen their impact. "I've spent 3 years trying to atone for what we created, gathering data from infected populations and working toward a cure." The council erupted into chaos. Voices rose in anger, accusation, and disbelief as the revelation sank in. 2 of the people responsible for humanity's near extinction were now sitting within North Point's walls, and the community's leadership had to decide whether they represented salvation or damnation. Thessaly raised her hand for silence, her medical training helping her process the emotional turmoil more clinically than the others. "How long would you need to evaluate whether Casimir's research could lead to a viable cure? Working together, with access to a proper laboratory?" Indira considered the question carefully. "Perhaps 6 months to determine feasibility. Another year for development and testing if the theoretical framework proves sound. A year we might not have if Rael's intelligence about infected migration is accurate." Thessaly stood, pacing to the room's single window that offered a view of the settlement's bustling main street. Children played in the designated safe zones while adults tended to crops and livestock, normal life persisting in defiance of an abnormal world. "I'm calling for a settlement-wide vote. Every adult resident gets to decide whether we keep Casimir alive and support this research." Magnus slammed his fist on the table. "You're gambling with our security, Thessaly. If word spreads that we're harboring the architect of the apocalypse, other settlements might view us as collaborators. We could face attacks from human enemies as well as infected ones. And if we pass up the chance to end this nightmare permanently, we become complicit in every future death." Thessaly turned back to face the council, her expression resolute. "I won't make this decision alone. Our people deserve a voice in determining their own fate." As the council members dispersed to prepare for the unprecedented vote, Indira remained behind, staring at her hands as if seeing blood that wouldn't wash away. Thessaly approached her quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because I hoped I could find the answer myself," Indira whispered. "I thought if I could develop a cure without revealing my involvement, maybe the guilt would become bearable." She looked up at Thessaly with eyes that held 3 years of accumulated pain. "I never imagined Casimir would seek redemption too." In the medical bay, Casimir sat in his isolation cell, staring through reinforced glass at the settlement's daily life. He had watched Thessaly navigate the initial shock of his arrival with impressive composure, recognizing in her the kind of leader who might be capable of making impossible decisions. Whether that would work in his favor remained to be seen. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. A small figure peered around the corner, a child of perhaps 8 years old with curious dark eyes and an unruly mop of black hair. The boy studied Casimir with the directness that only children possessed, seemingly unafraid of the man that adults whispered about in fearful tones. "Are you really the one who made the monsters?" the child asked with startling matter-of-factness. Casimir felt his throat constrict with emotion. "Yes," he managed. "I am." "What's your name?" "Zephyr Marquez. Mom says you might help fix what you broke." The child tilted his head, considering this with 8-year-old logic. "That seems fair." Before Casimir could respond, Zephyr's mother appeared and quickly ushered him away, but not before the boy offered a small wave goodbye. As the hallway returned to silence, Casimir found himself thinking that perhaps redemption might be possible after all, if he could earn the forgiveness of children who had never known a world without monsters. The vote took place 48 hours later in North Point's main courtyard, with every adult resident casting their decision in secret ballots that Rael had hastily programmed into his tablet system. The process was somber, reflecting the gravity of a choice that would define the settlement's future. Thessaly watched from the makeshift podium as neighbors who had survived 3 years of horror together now found themselves divided over questions of justice, mercy, and survival. When the final tally appeared on the main display screen, the courtyard fell silent. 173 votes to allow Casimir to live and pursue research. 168 votes for immediate execution. The margin was impossibly thin, 5 votes determining whether humanity's potential savior would live to see another dawn. Magnus Torvald stepped forward, his scarred hands clenched into fists. "This is madness, Thessaly. You're splitting our community apart for the sake of 2 people who destroyed the world." "The vote was fair and democratic," Thessaly replied, though her own voice carried the strain of the decision. "We honor the will of our people, even when that will is divided." By 5 votes. Elena Vasquez pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. 5 votes, and you're going to trust our lives to the man who murdered billions? Before Thessaly could respond, Indira appeared beside her on the platform. The woman's normally pale complexion had taken on an ashen quality, but her voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "Then hold me accountable as well. I was equally responsible for the Lazarus strain's development. If Dr. Voss deserves death, so do I." The crowd's murmur shifted to stunned silence as the full implications of her words sank in. For 8 months, they had known Indira as a valuable if mysterious community member. Now she stood before them as a confessed architect of their suffering, willingly placing her fate alongside Casimir's. Young Zephyr Marquez wiggled free from his mother's grasp and ran toward the platform, his small voice cutting through the tension. "She helps in the medical bay. She saved Mrs. Peterson when the fever came." His mother tried to retrieve him, but Zephyr planted himself firmly at the platform's base. "Bad people don't help other people get better." From the crowd, other voices began to emerge. Indira had indeed assisted in the medical bay, contributing knowledge that had saved lives during several recent crises. Her research into infected behavior patterns had helped improve North Point's defenses. Whatever sins she carried from the past, her actions within the settlement had been consistently beneficial. Thessaly seized the moment. "We have a chance to move beyond vengeance toward healing. Not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity. Yes, it requires trusting people who carry terrible guilt. But sometimes redemption is the only path forward." Rail climbed onto the platform, his tablet displaying new data. "I've been monitoring communications from settlements across the Midwest. There are confirmed reports of massive infected movements converging toward major population centers. Whatever's driving this behavior, it's unprecedented in scale." He paused, looking out over faces that had become his extended family. "We need every advantage we can get, even if it comes from an unexpected source." The crowd began to disperse gradually, residents returning to their daily routines with the heavy knowledge that their community would never be quite the same. Some gathered in small groups, discussing the implications in hushed tones. Others maintained deliberate distance from neighbors who had voted differently, creating invisible fractures in the social fabric that had sustained them through countless hardships. In the medical bay, Thessaly found Casimir and Indira seated across from each other in the isolation room, separated by reinforced glass but connected by shared guilt and purpose. Their reunion had been awkward, 3 years of believing the other dead, followed by the shock of meeting again under circumstances neither could have imagined. "The settlement voted to give you a chance," Thessaly announced as she entered. "Barely, but democracy is democracy. You'll have access to our laboratory facilities and whatever resources we can spare. In exchange, I need complete transparency about your research and regular progress reports." Casimir nodded slowly. "What about security?" Magnus was right about one thing: our presence here puts your community at risk from other human settlements. "That's our problem to manage," Thessaly replied firmly. "Your job is to focus on finding a cure. But understand this, the moment I believe you're manipulating us or withholding crucial information, this arrangement ends." Through the glass, Indira leaned forward. There's something else you need to know. The infected migrations that Rail detected, they're not random. The Lazarus strain included a dormant component designed to activate under specific environmental conditions. We're approaching the 3-year mark since the initial outbreak, which was the theoretical trigger point. The blood drained from Thessaly's face. Trigger for what? Phase 2 of the infection, Casimir answered grimly. Enhanced coordination, increased aggression, and resistance to conventional countermeasures. The infected are about to become far more dangerous than anything we've faced so far. How long do we have? Based on the migration patterns Rail documented, perhaps 6 weeks before the enhanced behaviors fully manifest. Indira's voice carried the weight of scientific certainty mixed with personal horror. After that, traditional survival strategies will become inadequate. Thessaly stared at the two scientists who had created humanity's nightmare and might now represent its only hope for salvation. The vote had been about more than justice or mercy, it had been about survival in its most fundamental form. 6 weeks to develop countermeasures against an enhanced threat that could overwhelm even the most prepared communities. What do you need to get started? Access to North Point's laboratory equipment, tissue samples from infected subjects, and complete isolation from the general population, Casimir replied. Our work will be dangerous, and if something goes wrong, containment will be crucial. And what are our chances of success? Indira and Casimir exchanged a look that communicated volumes about shared knowledge and accumulated regret. Honestly? Less than 20%, Indira admitted. But it's the only chance any of us have. As Thessaly left the medical bay to begin organizing the research effort, she passed Zephyr Marquez playing in the hallway with a group of other children. Their laughter echoed off the walls, a sound of innocence persisting in the face of unimaginable darkness. These children deserved a future free from the monsters that haunted their world, and she would do whatever was necessary to give them that chance. Even if it meant trusting the people who had created those monsters in the first place. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Rail burst into the makeshift laboratory where Casimir and Indira had begun their work, his face pale with shock. We've got incoming refugees from the eastern settlements. They're reporting something new, infected that coordinate attacks, use tools, and demonstrate problem-solving abilities. The enhanced phase had begun ahead of schedule, and humanity's window for developing countermeasures had just become dramatically smaller. Across the laboratory, Casimir and Indira looked at each other with the grim recognition that their theoretical projections were becoming horrifying reality. The first enhanced infected reached North Point's perimeter 3 days after the refugee convoy arrived, and their behavior immediately confirmed humanity's worst fears. Instead of the mindless shambling that had characterized the plague for 3 years, these creatures moved with predatory intelligence, testing the settlement's defenses at multiple points while maintaining coordinated timing that suggested sophisticated communication. Thessaly watched from the command center as one group of infected systematically dismantled a section of outer fencing while another group created a distraction at the main gate. The precision of their actions chilled her more than their increased speed or strength. Humanity had adapted to fighting mindless monsters, intelligent ones represented an entirely different level of threat. They're learning our patterns, Magnus reported over the radio, his voice tight with stress. The Eastern Approach team just shifted tactics when we repositioned our defenders. These things are thinking. In the laboratory, Casimir and Indira worked frantically to accelerate their research timeline. The facility itself was impressive for a survivor settlement. North Point's original incarnation as a private medical research campus had left them with equipment that remained functional despite 3 years of improvised maintenance. Still, developing countermeasures to an enhanced bioweapon required resources and time they didn't possess. The theoretical framework assumes we can target the neural pathways responsible for higher cognitive function while leaving basic motor control intact, Indira explained as she prepared tissue samples from recently killed enhanced infected. If we can disrupt their coordination abilities without destroying the underlying brain function, we might create a reversion effect. Might being the operative word, Casimir added grimly. He studied readouts from their latest batch of experiments, noting patterns that both encouraged and terrified him. The enhancement process appears to be stabilizing neural tissue that typically degrades in standard infected. We're not just dealing with zombies anymore, we're dealing with evolved zombies. Rael appeared in the laboratory doorway, his tablet displaying real-time surveillance data from the settlement's defensive network. The enhanced infected are maintaining a perimeter around North Point instead of attacking directly. It's like they're planning something. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, they could see the creatures moving through the abandoned suburbs beyond the settlement's walls. Their movements were deliberate, almost military in their coordination. Groups of 5 to 8 infected established observation positions at regular intervals, creating a siege formation that suggested tactical awareness. They're waiting for reinforcements, Indira realized with growing horror. The migration patterns Rael detected, they weren't random movement toward food sources. They were a coordination signal, calling enhanced infected to converge on surviving human settlements. The implications struck everyone simultaneously. North Point wasn't facing a random attack by evolved zombies, they were being specifically targeted by a organized force that viewed human settlements as strategic objectives to be captured rather than simply consumed. Thessaly's voice crackled over the laboratory's communication system. How long until you have something we can use? Casimir looked at the equipment surrounding them, then at his research partner who shared his guilt and desperation. Under ideal conditions, with unlimited resources and no external pressure? 6 months minimum for a working prototype. He paused, listening to distant sounds of enhanced infected testing the settlement's outer defenses. Under current conditions? We need a miracle. Then we better start praying for one, Thessaly replied before cutting the connection. That night, as North Point's defenders maintained nervous watch from their positions, an unexpected visitor appeared at the laboratory's entrance. Zephyr Marquez stood in the hallway, holding a small electronic device that Rael had built to help children communicate with family members working in different areas of the settlement. Dr. Indira? Dr. Casimir? The boy's voice was steady despite the fear that all the children were struggling to hide. Can I ask you something? Indira activated the intercom system that allowed conversation through the laboratory's isolation barriers. Of course, Zephyr. What's on your mind? The monsters outside, they're different now, aren't they? Smarter. Yes, Casimir answered honestly. They've changed in ways that make them more dangerous than before. Zephyr considered this with the serious expression that had become common among children who had never known safety. Mom says you made them in the first place. Is that why you know how to fix them? The question cut straight to the heart of their moral dilemma. Casimir and Indira had created the Lazarus strain, but their knowledge also represented humanity's best hope for survival. Redemption and salvation were becoming inextricably linked, forcing them to confront their guilt through service to the people they had wronged. We hope so, Indira replied softly. We're trying very hard to undo what we did wrong. That's good, Zephyr said with 8-year-old wisdom. My mom says people should fix their mistakes when they can. He paused, then added with surprising insight, even if it's scary. After Zephyr left, Casimir and Indira returned to their work with renewed urgency. The boys' simple faith in their ability to atone through action crystallized something that had been developing since their reunion. They weren't just racing against time to save North Point, they were fighting for the right to consider themselves human again. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m, when Indira noticed an unexpected interaction between enhanced infected neural tissue and a compound derived from pre-outbreak antiviral research. The effect was subtle but consistent. Exposure to the compound caused temporary disruption in the electrical patterns associated with higher cognitive function. It's not a cure, she told Casimir as they studied the data together. But it might be enough to disrupt their coordination abilities for short periods. If we could create an aerosol delivery system, we could level the playing field temporarily, Casimir finished. Force them back into individual, non-coordinated behavior patterns that our defenders know how to handle. They worked through the night, synthesizing larger quantities of the compound and designing a deployment mechanism that could saturate the area around North Point with the disruptive agent. By dawn, they had produced enough material for a limited field test, assuming they could convince Thessaly to risk everything on an untested weapon created by the people responsible for their current nightmare. As the sun rose over North Point's walls, the enhanced infected began moving with new purpose. Their siege formation tightened, and individual groups started probing the settlement's defenses with increasing aggression. Whatever they had been waiting for was about to arrive, and humanity's window for survival was closing rapidly. In the laboratory, Casimir and Indira prepared to present their partial solution to a community that had voted by 5 votes to trust them with their lives. Whether that trust would extend to betting everything on an experimental weapon remained to be seen. The sound of approaching engines from the north announced the arrival of what the enhanced infected had been waiting for, a convoy of vehicles carrying human raiders who had formed an alliance with the evolved zombies. Humanity's greatest threat was no longer just the infected, but the collaboration between enhanced zombies and humans who had chosen to serve them in exchange for protection. The revelation that humans were actively collaborating with enhanced infected shattered every assumption about the nature of their conflict. Through telescopic surveillance, Rail documented the impossible, living humans working alongside the evolved zombies, using hand signals and tactical coordination to plan joint attacks on surviving settlements. The psychological impact on North Point's defenders was devastating. They had adapted to fighting monsters, but fighting their own species in alliance with those monsters challenged their fundamental understanding of loyalty and survival. Thessaly gathered the settlement's leadership in the command center as reports flooded in from observation posts. The human raiders wore distinctive red armbands and appeared to be led by former military personnel who had retained their strategic training while abandoning their humanity. Their vehicles carried supplies that suggested a well-established supply chain, indicating that this collaboration wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger movement. "They're calling themselves the New Evolution," Magnus reported, his voice heavy with disgust. Radio intercepts suggest they believe the enhanced infected represent humanity's next evolutionary step, and they want to be part of it rather than fight against it. How is that even possible? Elena Vasquez asked. The infected are driven by hunger and aggression. What could they possibly offer human collaborators? Indira's voice came through the communication system from the laboratory, where she and Casimir had been monitoring the developments while continuing their research. The enhancement process doesn't eliminate intelligence, it redirects it toward specific objectives. If the enhanced infected have developed the ability to form alliances with humans, it suggests their cognitive evolution is far more sophisticated than we anticipated. The implications were staggering. Enhanced infected that could negotiate, plan, and maintain alliances represented a fundamental shift in the nature of the conflict. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival against mindless predators, they were engaged in a strategic war against an intelligent enemy that had successfully recruited human allies. What's the tactical situation? Thessaly asked, pushing aside the philosophical horror to focus on immediate survival needs. They're establishing camps at 3 points around our perimeter, Rail reported from his monitoring station. The raiders have heavy weapons and vehicles, while the enhanced infected provide reconnaissance and coordination. It's a combined arms approach designed to overwhelm our defenses through sustained pressure. Casimir appeared on the video feed from the laboratory, his haggard appearance reflecting the intensity of their accelerated research schedule. We have a potential countermeasure ready for field testing. It's not perfect, but it might disrupt the enhanced infected's coordination abilities long enough for you to deal with the human raiders separately. What kind of risks are we talking about? Thessaly demanded. The compound is derived from antiviral research, so it should be harmless to uninfected humans, Indira answered. But we haven't had time for comprehensive testing. There could be unexpected side effects or interactions we haven't accounted for. Magnus leaned forward aggressively. You want us to risk chemical exposure based on 3 days of research by the people who created this nightmare in the first place? You're already risking death by combat against an enemy that's smarter and better equipped than anything we've faced before, Casimir replied bluntly. Our compound might level the playing field, or it might fail completely. But doing nothing guarantees defeat. Thessaly studied the tactical displays showing enemy positions around North Point's perimeter. The mathematics of their situation were brutal, outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy with strategic advantages that conventional defensive tactics couldn't counter. The experimental compound represented their only chance to disrupt the alliance between enhanced infected and human raiders. How do we deploy it? Aerosol dispersal through the settlement's emergency ventilation system, Indira explained. We've modified the compound to remain stable in atmospheric conditions for approximately 30 minutes, which should be enough time to affect the enhanced infected throughout the immediate area. And if it doesn't work? Then we try conventional defense until we're overrun, Casimir answered with brutal honesty. But if it does work, you'll have a window of opportunity to engage the raiders without coordinated infected support. The decision weighed heavily on Thessaly's shoulders. She was being asked to trust the judgment of scientists whose previous work had destroyed civilization, while simultaneously risking the lives of everyone under her protection on an untested weapon. The democratic process that had brought them to this point seemed inadequate for making choices that could determine humanity's survival. Young Zephyr Marquez appeared in the command center, having slipped past the adults who were supposed to be keeping children away from strategic planning sessions. His presence reminded everyone of what they were fighting to protect, innocence and hope in a world that had too little of either. Are the bad people coming? He asked with the directness that only children possessed. Yes, Thessaly answered honestly. But we're going to stop them. With the medicine that Dr. Indira and Dr. Casimir made? The boys' simple faith in their ability to find solutions highlighted the moral complexity of their situation. Children like Zephyr trusted the adults to protect them, even when those adults were forced to rely on people who had created the threats they faced. We're going to try, Thessaly confirmed. As evening approached, the enemy forces began final preparations for their assault. Radio intercepts revealed that the attack would begin at dawn, with enhanced infected creating breaches in North Point's defenses while human raiders provided heavy weapon support. The coordination between species represented a level of tactical sophistication that traditional defensive strategies couldn't counter. In the laboratory, Casimir and Indira made final adjustments to their compound while Rail prepared the deployment system. The weight of 3 years' guilt drove them to perfection in their work, knowing that failure would mean not just their own deaths but the destruction of a community that had offered them a chance at redemption. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that working with you again has been an honor, Indira told her former research partner as they completed their preparations. Even knowing what our previous collaboration cost the world. Especially knowing that, she replied. Redemption isn't possible without acknowledgement of guilt. We created this horror, and now we have a chance to end it. Through the laboratory windows, they could see North Point's defenders taking their positions for what might be the settlement's final night. Families said goodbye to each other with the knowledge that dawn would bring either salvation or annihilation. Children like Zephyr were moved to the most secure areas of the settlement, while adults prepared for combat against an enemy that challenged everything they understood about the nature of human survival. The alliance between Casimir, Indira, and the community of North Point had been forged through necessity rather than trust, but it represented something unprecedented in the post-outbreak world, cooperation between the architects of humanity's fall and the survivors of their creation. Whether that alliance would prove strong enough to save them all remained to be seen. As midnight approached, Thessaly made the final decision that would determine their fate. The experimental compound would be deployed at first light, coinciding with the enemy's planned assault. North Point would either emerge from the coming battle as proof that redemption was possible, or it would fall as another casualty of humanity's war against itself. Dawn broke with the mechanical precision of enemy coordination as enhanced infected began their assault on North Point's eastern defenses while human raiders opened fire from prepared positions to the north and west. The sound of gunfire mixed with inhuman roars as the alliance between species launched their coordinated attack, testing every defensive strategy the settlement had developed over 3 years of survival. Thessaly stood in the command center, her hand hovering over the control that would release Casimir and Indira's experimental compound into the atmosphere around North Point. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. 173 people had voted to trust the scientists with their lives, and now she was about to discover whether that trust would save them or kill them. Eastern Wall reports multiple breaches, Magnus' voice crackled over the radio. The enhanced infected are working together to tear apart our reinforcements. They're using coordinated lifting and pulling techniques that our defensive design never anticipated. Through the command center's reinforced windows, Thessaly could see the impossible sight of zombies employing tactical problem-solving skills. Groups of enhanced infected formed human pyramids to scale walls, while others used salvaged metal as tools to pry apart defensive barriers. Their coordination was flawless, suggesting communication methods that humanity had yet to understand. Rail, initiate compound deployment, Thessaly ordered. In the laboratory's control booth, Rail's fingers moved across his tablet interface, activating the modified ventilation system that would disperse the antiviral compound throughout the settlement's perimeter. Vents that had once circulated filtered air now released an invisible chemical cloud designed to disrupt the neural pathways responsible for enhanced infected coordination. Casimir and Indira watched through reinforced glass as their experimental weapon deployed into the morning air. 3 years of guilt and desperate hope had led to this moment, the test of whether their scientific knowledge could provide salvation rather than destruction. If their calculations were wrong, they would witness the final extermination of one of humanity's last functioning communities. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Enhanced infected that had been working in perfect coordination suddenly began exhibiting the confused, individual behavior patterns characteristic of standard zombies. Their tactical formations dissolved as cognitive disruption left them unable to maintain the complex communication necessary for coordinated action. "It's working," Magnus reported with barely contained excitement. "The infected at the Eastern Wall have stopped coordinating. They're reverting to individual attack patterns that our defenders can handle." But the human raiders adapted quickly to their allies' sudden confusion. Radio intercepts revealed rapid tactical adjustments as the new evolution forces realized their enhanced infected support had been compromised. Instead of coordinated attacks, they shifted to heavy weapons bombardment designed to breach North Point's walls through superior firepower. "North Wall is taking sustained artillery fire," Elena Vasquez reported from her position. "They're using military-grade equipment that our defenses weren't designed to withstand." Thessaly found herself facing a new tactical reality. The compound had successfully neutralized the enhanced infected threat, but the human raiders remained formidably equipped and strategically positioned. North Point's defenders were skilled at fighting zombies, but combat against well-armed human enemies required different tactics and equipment they didn't possess. "Magnus, redeploy all available personnel to defensive positions facing the raider camps," she ordered. "Focus fire on their heavy weapons positions and try to disrupt their command structure." In the settlement's secure areas, children like Zephyr huddled with elderly residents and others unable to fight, listening to the sounds of battle that would determine their fate. The boy clutched a small wooden toy that Rail had carved for him, finding comfort in its familiar weight while explosions shook the walls around them. The laboratory's communication system activated as Indira's voice joined the tactical coordination. "The compound's effects will last approximately 25 more minutes. After that, the enhanced infected will regain their coordination abilities unless we can maintain continuous exposure." "How much more compound do we have?" Thessaly asked. "Enough for 2 additional deployments of similar duration," Casimir replied. "But each subsequent release will be less effective as the enhanced infected develop temporary resistance to the disruption effect." The tactical mathematics were becoming clearer. North Point had perhaps an hour of enhanced infected neutralization, during which they needed to eliminate or drive off the human raiders before facing coordinated zombie attacks again. The window for victory was narrow and closing rapidly. "Rail, I need you to coordinate our communications and try to jam the raiders' radio frequencies," Thessaly instructed. "If we can disrupt their tactical coordination, we might be able to defeat them in detail." Young Rail's technical expertise proved crucial as he employed homemade electronic warfare capabilities against the new evolution forces. His knowledge of radio systems and signal processing allowed him to interfere with enemy communications while maintaining Northpoint's internal coordination networks. The battle's momentum began to shift as Northpoint's defenders exploited their temporary advantages. Enhanced Infected wandered aimlessly without coordination, making them relatively easy targets for experienced zombie fighters. Meanwhile, communication disruption left Raider units operating independently, allowing Thessaly's forces to concentrate overwhelming firepower against isolated enemy positions. But the human Raiders were far from defeated. Their leader, a former military officer named Colonel Marcus Reed who had embraced the new evolution philosophy, recognized the tactical situation and began implementing contingency plans that didn't rely on enhanced infected support. All units, fall back to secondary positions and prepare for conventional siege tactics, Reed's voice crackled through intercepted radio transmissions. We don't need zombie allies to starve these people into submission. The transmission revealed the Raiders' strategic patience. They possessed sufficient supplies and equipment to maintain a prolonged siege, while Northpoint's resources were limited by their isolated position. Even if the settlement's defenders could maintain their current defensive success, they would eventually face defeat through attrition. In the laboratory, Casimir and Indira confronted this new tactical reality while preparing their second compound deployment. Their weapon could neutralize enhanced infected coordination, but it couldn't address the fundamental resource imbalance that favored the Raiders in any extended conflict. We need something more permanent, Indira realized as she studied the enemy positions through surveillance feeds. A way to turn the enhanced infected against their human allies rather than simply disrupting their coordination. Behavioral modification rather than cognitive disruption, Casimir agreed. If we could alter their recognition patterns, make them identify Raiders as potential targets. The concept was theoretically possible but practically challenging. Modifying the compound to affect enhanced infected target recognition would require precise understanding of their neural pathways and careful calibration to avoid unintended effects on friendly human forces. As Northpoint's defenders prepared for the next phase of battle, the settlement's survival increasingly depended on the ability of two guilt-ridden scientists to transform their knowledge of destruction into instruments of salvation. The alliance between creators and survivors would face its ultimate test in the hours to come. The second compound deployment at midday brought unexpected results that changed the tactical situation dramatically. Rather than simply disrupting enhanced infected coordination, the modified formula appeared to alter their target recognition protocols, causing them to identify the new evolution Raiders as threats rather than allies. The sight of zombies turning on their human collaborators created chaos in the enemy ranks that Northpoint's defenders were quick to exploit. Colonel Reed's voice erupted over intercepted communications as his carefully planned siege dissolved into combat on multiple fronts. All units, disengage from zombie contact and fall back to vehicle positions. The enhanced infected have turned hostile. Repeat, enhanced infected are now engaging our forces. Through telescopic surveillance, Thessaly watched the impossible spectacle of humans running from zombies that had previously been their allies. The enhanced infected retained their coordination abilities but now directed them toward hunting the Raiders who had, moments before, been fighting alongside them. The tactical reversal was so complete that some Raider units found themselves trapped between vengeful zombies and Northpoint's defensive fire. Casimir, what exactly did you do to the compound? Thessaly asked over the communication system. We modified the neural pathway targeting to affect recognition patterns rather than just coordination, came the reply from the laboratory. The enhanced infected now identify anyone wearing red armbands or carrying specific equipment signatures as priority targets for elimination. The implications were staggering. In attempting to neutralize the alliance between enhanced infected and human Raiders, Casimir and Indira had essentially reprogrammed zombie behavior to serve Northpoint's tactical interests. The creatures that had threatened to destroy the settlement were now actively hunting their former allies. Magnus coordinated the defensive response to take maximum advantage of the enemy's confusion. All units, Focus fire on raider positions while the enhanced infected are engaging them. Don't give them time to reorganize or retreat effectively. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the 3-year history of the zombie apocalypse. Enhanced infected pursued fleeing raiders with relentless coordination while North Point's defenders eliminated isolated enemy positions. The new evolution forces, caught between two hostile factions, found their superior equipment and numbers increasingly meaningless as their tactical cohesion collapsed. But victory came with a terrible moral cost that Thessaly recognized even as she celebrated their survival. They had essentially weaponized zombies against human beings, crossing an ethical line that previous survivors had never contemplated. The enhanced infected hunting former allies weren't acting from choice or justice, they were following modified behavioral programming that treated human beings as prey. Colonel Reed is requesting parley, Rail reported, monitoring enemy communications. He wants to negotiate surrender terms. The request surprised everyone. Reed had demonstrated tactical competence and ideological commitment to the new evolution philosophy. His willingness to surrender suggested either desperation or strategic calculation that Thessaly couldn't immediately identify. Accept the communication but maintain defensive positions, she decided. Let's hear what he has to say. Reed's voice came through the communication system with the crisp authority of professional military training. North Point leadership, this is Colonel Marcus Reed of the New Evolution Coalition. I'm requesting immediate cessation of hostilities and safe passage for my remaining personnel. You attacked us without provocation, Thessaly replied. Why should we grant you anything except the opportunity to surrender unconditionally? Because what you've done here changes everything, Reed answered with unexpected urgency. You've demonstrated that enhanced infected behavior can be modified through chemical intervention. That knowledge is worth more than any tactical victory. Through the laboratory's communication system, Indira joined the conversation. What do you mean, Colonel? The new evolution isn't just a local phenomenon, Reed explained. There are similar groups across the continent, all working toward the same goal of alliance with enhanced infected. If your compound can disrupt those alliances or redirect zombie behavior, it could shift the balance of power globally. The revelation struck like a physical blow. North Point's struggle wasn't an isolated conflict but part of a larger war between surviving humans and those who had chosen to collaborate with evolved zombies. The compound that Casimir and Indira had developed might be the key to saving human settlements across the world. You're asking us to trust the word of someone who just tried to kill us all, Magnus interjected over the radio. I'm offering you intelligence about new evolution operations in exchange for safe passage, Reed countered. Locations, numbers, equipment, and strategic objectives for groups from here to the Atlantic coast. Information that could save thousands of lives if properly utilized. Thessaly found herself facing another impossible decision. Reed represented everything she despised about humanity's response to the crisis, the willingness to abandon moral principles for survival advantage. But his intelligence could indeed save other communities facing similar threats. What guarantees do we have that your information is accurate? None, except the fact that my survival depends on providing value to settlements that could otherwise execute me as a war criminal, Reed admitted. But I'm wagering that people like you still believe in the possibility of human redemption. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Reed was asking for the same chance at redemption that North Point had granted to Casimir and Indira, the opportunity to atone for past actions through service to humanity's survival. The parallel created a moral complexity that simple justice couldn't resolve. In the laboratory, Casimir and Indira monitored the conversation while preparing additional compound for future deployment. Their success in modifying enhanced infected behavior had created possibilities they hadn't anticipated, along with responsibilities that extended far beyond North Point's survival. We could modify the formula for different applications, Indira noted quietly. Target specific types of enhanced infected, create area denial effects, or even develop countermeasures against chemical intervention. The question is whether we should, Casimir replied. We've already crossed lines that previous survivors wouldn't have contemplated. How far are we willing to go? Young Zephyr appeared in the laboratory hallway again, his presence serving as a reminder of innocence persisting in the face of moral complexity. The boy had listened to the adult conversations about redemption and responsibility, processing concepts that most children his age would never need to understand. Dr. Casimir? Dr. Indira, he called through the intercom. Are you going to help other kids like me? The question crystallized the choice they faced. Reed's intelligence could help them save other settlements, protecting children across the continent from the new evolution threat. But accepting his offer meant validating the principle that past crimes could be forgiven in exchange for future service. Yes, Indira answered simply. We're going to help everyone we can. As negotiations continued with Colonel Reed, North Point's defenders maintained their positions while Enhanced Infected continued hunting the remaining raiders. The compound's effects were beginning to wear off, but the damage to New Evolution tactical cohesion was already complete. Victory belonged to the settlement, but the war for humanity's future was just beginning. Thessaly made her decision with the weight of leadership and the hope of redemption. Reed would be granted safe passage in exchange for intelligence, just as Casimir and Indira had been granted life in exchange for their scientific knowledge. The alliance between former enemies would expand to include a former military officer who had chosen collaboration with monsters before choosing to serve humanity again. 6 months after the Battle of North Point, the settlement had transformed from an isolated survivor community into the headquarters of humanity's organized resistance against the New Evolution Coalition. The intelligence provided by Colonel Reed had proven accurate and invaluable, leading to successful operations against collaborator bases across 7 states. Reed himself had become an unlikely but effective military advisor, his tactical expertise helping coordinate strikes against former allies who still pursued the philosophy he had abandoned. The laboratory where Casimir and Indira worked had expanded into a full research complex, with additional scientists recruited from other settlements contributing to the development of Enhanced Infected countermeasures. Their original compound had been refined into multiple variants designed for specific tactical applications, from area denial to behavioral modification to complete neural disruption. The weapons that had saved North Point were now being manufactured and distributed to human settlements across the continent. Thessaly stood on the observation deck that had been constructed atop the settlement's highest building, watching the daily life of a community that had grown from 300 to nearly 2,000 residents. Refugees from other settlements had brought stories of successful resistance operations using compounds developed in North Point's laboratories. The alliance between creators and survivors had become a model for human cooperation in the face of existential threat. But victory had come with costs that weighed heavily on everyone involved. The Enhanced Infected they had once fought were now effectively extinct. The widespread deployment of neural disruption compounds had reduced them to standard zombies incapable of the coordination that had made them so dangerous. Humanity had won its war against evolved enemies, but only by committing to the systematic elimination of their enhanced cognitive abilities. In the research complex, Indira studied reports from field operations while Casimir worked on their latest project, a compound designed to reverse the Lazarus strain entirely rather than simply managing its effects. 3 years of guilt had driven them toward the ultimate redemption, the complete cure that would end the zombie apocalypse permanently. The theoretical framework is sound, Casimir reported as he reviewed their latest test results. But implementation would require global deployment on a scale that might not be feasible given current resource limitations. Then we make it feasible, Indira replied with the determination that had carried them through months of seemingly impossible research challenges. We've already proven that redemption is possible through service. Now we prove that healing is possible through science. Their work was interrupted by young Zephyr Marquez, now 9 years old and serving as an unofficial liaison between the research complex and the community. His role had developed naturally as adults recognized his ability to translate complex scientific concepts into language that everyone could understand. The boy who had once asked simple questions about monsters and redemption had become a bridge between the settlement's technical and civilian populations. Dr. Indira, Dr. Casimir, Thessaly wants to see you in the command center, he announced with the seriousness that had replaced much of his childhood playfulness. "There's news from the eastern settlements. They found Thessaly studying intelligence reports alongside Colonel Reed and Magnus, their former enemies now working together toward common objectives." The transformation of relationships within North Point reflected broader changes in human society. Survival had forced people to move beyond traditional concepts of justice toward pragmatic cooperation. "We've received confirmation from the Atlantic Coalition settlements," Thessaly announced. "The last major new evolution stronghold has been eliminated. Organized collaboration between humans and enhanced infected is effectively ended across the entire eastern seaboard." The news represented a strategic victory that few had imagined possible 6 months earlier. The alliance between zombie and human forces that had threatened to overwhelm surviving settlements had been systematically dismantled through coordinated operations using North Point-developed countermeasures. "What about the enhanced infected populations themselves?" Reed asked, his question carrying the weight of someone who had once allied with the creatures he now helped eliminate. "Neutralized or reverted to standard infected behavior patterns," Magnus reported. "The latest deployment of neural disruption compounds appears to have achieved permanent cognitive regression in most cases." Indira felt the familiar mixture of triumph and horror that accompanied their research successes. They had saved humanity from an evolutionary threat that could have led to permanent subjugation or extinction. But they had also committed to the systematic destruction of intelligence in creatures that had, in their own way, represented a form of life adapting to post-apocalyptic conditions. "There's something else," Thessaly continued. "Radio contacts from survivor settlements in other countries indicate that enhanced infected populations are appearing globally. Our compounds work, but distribution and coordination remain challenging given the breakdown in international communication." The revelation transformed their local victory into the beginning of a global campaign. The alliance that had saved North Point would need to expand beyond continental boundaries to address a worldwide threat that required unprecedented cooperation between survivor communities. Casimir and Indira exchanged a look that communicated 3 years of shared guilt and growing hope. Their research had evolved from desperate attempts at local redemption into the foundation for humanity's global survival strategy. The knowledge that had once destroyed civilization was now being used to rebuild it on terms that prioritized cooperation over conflict. "How do we coordinate global deployment?" Indira asked. "The same way we've coordinated everything else," Thessaly replied. "Through alliances between people who have learned to trust each other despite past conflicts." That evening, as North Point settled into its nighttime routines, Zephyr found himself on the observation deck where Thessaly often went to think about the future. The boy had developed a habit of joining her there, their conversations serving as informal planning sessions for the settlement's continued growth. "Do you think Dr. Indira and Dr. Casimir will really be able to cure everyone?" he asked, studying the lights of a community that had become a beacon of hope in a dark world. "They're going to try," Thessaly answered honestly. "But even if they can't, they've already given us something almost as valuable." "What's that?" "They've proven that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven, and that redemption is possible through service to others." She looked down at the boy who had grown up in the aftermath of apocalypse.